My name is Susan Colbert. I am interviewing Dale Phelps on August 24th, 2020 at the Sparta Public Library in Sparta, Illinois. Mr. Phelps will start with some biographical details. Where and when were you born?
I was born in Corderville, Illinois in 1937 in July.
Who were your parents?
My mother was Melba Welch Phelps and my dad was James Phelps.
And what were their occupations?
Well, my dad was a coal miner and he was working at Moffat's mine, got killed at Moffat's mine in 1946. My mom was a housewife. She was a Welch from Sparta originally, went to school here, and that's our occupations.
Do you have siblings?
I did.
And what are their names and genders?
I had the first one in the family was the girl. She was the oldest. Her name was Roxy O'Rear, married to Charles O'Rear. And second was Ronald Phelps, my oldest brother. He was in the Air Force, like me, or before me, and he retired 26 years in the Air Force, so he had a pretty good stout. Then Ben was my next brother, and he was in the Air Force, but he was in for 4 years. Didn't particularly care for the longevity, so he got out. And then me, and I stayed 4 years, and I was like Ben, I had enough in 4 years. It was all right, I enjoyed it, but you know, it's not what I wanted out of my life. And then I had a brother, Lynn, and he was in the Navy. He was in, and my youngest brother, Michael, is 31 years Navy, retired 31 years as a Master Chief, Command Master Chief in the big high rank, more than me.
Well, what were you doing when you were when you joined the service?
When I just got out of school. I got out of school at Corderville, 1955. I got out in May, and I went directly to the post office and looked up the guy to sign up for. I had a friend, Ken Carnes from Corderville. Him and I went together and signed up, and we went in October the 12th, I believe, 1955.
Where were you living? You were living in Corderville. You already answered that.
Yeah.
And in which branch of the military did you serve?
The U.S. Air Force. There's only one.
Yes. Why did you choose that specific?
Well, like I said, my oldest brother, Ron, had been in, and the next oldest brother, Ben, had been in, both of them in the Air Force, and seemed to like it. They kind of pushed it because you could get schooling, you know, and that works good if you, I mean, when you go to high school in your hometown, that's about all the schooling you get. I wasn't rich enough to go to college back in 1955. So I thought if I needed some more schooling, it'd be a place to get it.
And what kind of schooling did you have in mind?
Anything that would produce a job for a lifetime. And it did, it worked out that way. I got in, once I got in the service, they give me a battery of tests. And what are you most qualified for, this and I got most qualified to be a machinist, and they sent me to Chanute Field up at Rantoul, Illinois, and I went for 6 months at a machinist school, and it turned out to be my lifelong job, you know. It worked out great. I got out of the service. I was a machinist 4 years in the service, got out, went to work at McDonnell Aircraft as a machinist, and was there for 6 years. Then I went to Granite City and worked there for 5 years. Then I come to Baldwin to the power plant, and I worked 26 years there and retired.
Can you tell a little bit about what a machinist does?
Well, yeah, you have a battery of machines, a lathe and a milling machine, and grinders. And it's manufacture of parts. You can start from scratch with a piece of metal and make stuff, you know.
What happened when you departed for training camp and during your early days of training?
When I departed from Coderville, we went to St. Louis, Ken and I, and the guy that took us up there put us in a hotel, and he said, "You'll be overnight here, and then we'll get you on a train and head you for Texas." So we did, and we got on. I never was on a train riding that long, you know, country hick boy. And we went from St. Louis to San Antonio, Texas. Took a long time, was overnight, and slept on a sleeper car or a train. That, you know, you just don't get to do that every day. And it worked out. We got to Texas okay.
Do you recall your instructors? And if so, what were they like?
I do recall when I first got to San Antonio, they put you in a squadron or a group of men, and and the first night that we were there, they call you into the office one by one, and I recall going into the office. You knock on their door and you have to do it a certain way, and so I knocked. Well, there was a ridge in the door, and I hit 2 times. Well, that didn't go over big. Well, they got me in there, and they elbowed me in the belly and stomped on my feet. You know, the things let you know that they were the boss, and I didn't care for that being. I was always my own person. I could do what I wanted coming from Coderville, you know. And so there was 2 of them. One of them was involved in that. The other one was involved in all of our marching and instruction for how you marched and that kind of thing. So neither one of them would have been my sidekicks.
What did you think of basic training?
Where?
Well, what do you
did I
think? Yes, what?
Basic training was so-so. I wasn't real fond of it. Again, I'm an old country boy, come from a small town of Coderville, and you go to that and you're dealing with people from Chicago and Philadelphia and all the big cities, and you're not that kind of a person, you know. So it was all right then.
What was the worst part of boot camp?
Well, I went down there in the middle of the summer, and we done a lot of marching out. They had parades, and you would get in your group and march out onto the parade field, and you had to stand at parade rest, they called it, with your hands behind your back, and you stood there for sometimes for 45 minutes without moving, and people would pass out from the heat. You know, you're in Texas, and it's warm down there, so we had a lot of people that passed out, couldn't take it, but I hung on.
Did you receive any specialized training? And I think you've already said that you did in a machinist training.
Yes.
How did that benefit you in your military career?
It did. I went for 6 months at Chinook Field at Rantoul, and the schooling was very good. They took time. one-on-one, an instructor would, if you didn't understand something, it's a lot like high school, you know, but anyhow, I learned that trade in 6 months, and then I was shipped out of there to up into Michigan, northern Michigan, on the dew line, they called it, where they flew jets along the Canadian border. Back at that time, Russia was, you know, known for flying over the Alaska, and so we kind of watched out. But anyhow, to let's see, where'd I go? Where I lost my train of thought.
You were in Michigan,
Okay.
and what kind of work as a machinist did you
Yeah,
do in Michigan?
From, well, same way. After I left school, went up there, they didn't have, the first base I went to didn't have a lot of machines to do my work. So I done whatever handyman jobs, you know. But as we got machines and stuff in to do, I became the guy that could run the machine shop for them. And I was there for, I think, 2.5 years. And then they transferred me to on up on the Canadian border. But they needed a machinist up there. It's that kind of stuff in the Air Force, what the machinist does, he makes parts, little parts for the airplanes, or there's instrument people and electricians and stuff that have to take panels off an aircraft, and when they do, they strip the screw heads out, then they ask the machinist to come out and remove the screws for them and stuff like that.
How did you adapt to military life, including the physical regimen, barracks, food, social life?
I think reasonably well. I can't, you know, not 100% because you just don't jump into something different. But yeah, I pretty well like what I got out of it. The food was always good. I had some food I didn't like, but you weren't allowed to say that.
And you mentioned you served in Texas and Michigan. Anywhere else?
No.
What are some memories of that experience? What was your first impression of Michigan or Texas?
Okay, I had a first impression of Michigan. Well, I'll go to Texas first. When I got to Texas, it was large, enormous, compared to everything I was used to. And you let it grow on you at basic training, and you get set in on a schedule and get everything going your way. And it worked out fine. Once I was glad to get out of there, we were due to get out on Christmas Day, and they held us over. I didn't get to go home, and I wanted to cry. But they finally let us go 2 days after Christmas and let us go home. So, yeah, then I stayed home for 15 days, then I went to Michigan. And when I got up there, this place was called K.I. Sawyer Airport, and I'd never heard of it. When I got there, in the middle of the night, I went up on a train, and I got to a little town called Ishpeming, and got out off the train in the middle of the night at like 1 o'clock in the morning, and there was no one around, and the place was closed, the depot, and so there happened to be an airman first class, air policeman standing there. He was me, someone off the train, and he asked me where I was going, and I told him K.I. Sawyer. He said, well, I'll give you a ride. There's no transportation. So I was happy to get the ride. He took me to the base with nothing. There was nothing on it. There was 4 barracks and a chow hall, and I didn't have anything else. So my first, almost a year, was dealing with nothing up there, didn't do any of machinist work or what we done, cut trees and done odd jobs.
What kind of friendships did you form while serving, and with whom?
Quite a few good friends. Some of them's gone now, but Roy Daniels from Missoula, Montana was a good friend. I met when I first got to Michigan and hung with him. He just died here this past year, and he come down, visited with me, and was a lifelong friendship. And Donovan Kennedy was a sergeant that once I got to Michigan, I got to be good friends with him, his wife and family, and they visited here in Illinois, come and stayed with me, and good friends.
How did you stay in touch with family and friends back home?
When I was in Michigan, I didn't do much. I wrote a few letters. I wasn't a good letter writer. My mom used to holler at me for not writing letters enough. But
What did you do for recreation or when you were off duty?
chased after the girls up there. I finally, in 1957, I met what now my wife, and we done things together, you know, dances, and she had a sister, and her sister was more my age, so we went and done polkas and dances of all kinds, and had a good time with them, you know.
And you've been married for quite a few years.
I have been married for 63 years, long time.
What was your most memorable experience while serving?
Oh, let's see. Do I have a, no, I'm just looking. The, I did get to, no, that was after I got out. I was gonna say I got to meet John F. Kennedy, but that's when after I got out and went to work at McDonnell Aircraft as a machinist, and John Kennedy flew into McDonnell Aircraft, and they let everybody out to see him. And I didn't get close enough to shake his hand, but it was an experience. Experiences in the service, I don't have anything outstanding. I mean, just so-so.
What did you think of the people you served with?
I never had, maybe I might have run into one or two in my whole career time that I didn't like, but most everybody I'm pretty easy to get along with.
What was the highest rank you ever achieved?
Airman first class.
What were your duties in the Air Force?
As a machinist, took care of everything on the airplanes that they would break or strip screws out or whatever have you. I had to do, you know, you go take care of them. Get called out a lot at night. The planes would be scrambling, flying up to Canada, and when they come back, stuff would be wrong. You get called out in the middle of the night to repair it.
Did you ever get to fly?
Not myself fly. I did fly an airplane with some of the guys that needed airtime to get their money, sergeants and people on higher lieutenants. And they would get in a plane and fly for 2 hours to get their time in so they get paid. So it'd say, you want to ride along with it? Yeah. So I did get quite a few rides.
Was your job dangerous?
No.
Where were you when your period of service was up?
I was Marquette, Michigan.
How did you return home?
I was married at the time and I drove home.
How were you received by your family and community?
Family and community, well, I come straight to my mother's house in Coderville, and they were all happy to see us. I had a wife, and she was 8.5 months pregnant, so they were happy to see her and see me, and that was our first time meeting her. So we all got to know each other, and then I moved into Coderville, into a place, and everything went good.
How did you readjust to civilian life?
Not a problem at all. I never did get in the service to where a lot of people like the service and want to stay. I never got that feeling. So I was glad to get out, and I was glad to go back to civilian life.
What was the biggest surprise about the civilian workplace?
You have, when you're in the service, you got people directly over you that's your boss, and there may be a number of steps. When you get out in civilian life, usually one person's your boss, and you have to do what he says. So you have to grow into that.
That made a difference in how you looked at civilian life.
Sure.
Have you remained in contact with or reunited with fellow veterans?
Just the one, I made a mistake on the Roy Daniels, the one good friend of mine who came back. I'd call him, he lived in California, and I'd call him and talk to him. I talked to him once in a while, but the guy, Donovan Kennedy, this past year, I got on the phone and tried to locate him, and I got hold of his wife, and I said, let me talk to Donovan. Well, he was dead, and that hurt, you know, but that's pretty well it. Both of them, there's two good friends. I had a lot of other friends, but there's some you stick with more.
What kind of activities did you and your friends do then when you had free time?
We drank a lot of beer.
Yeah.
We had a lot of parties on the beach. Lake Superior was pretty close by where I was stationed, and they would get cases of beer, and we'd go to the beach and have parties.
Are you a member of any veterans organizations?
No.
What have you done since separating from the military?
Well, I went to work at McDonnell Aircraft first. I worked there 6 years as a machinist. I left McDonnell. I'd worked with a boy that had a job in Granite City, and he said if I ever get an opening over there, a day job, I was working nights at McDonnell and couldn't get off. But he went over to Granite City, got a day job, and gave me a call in about a month, and they had a day opening. So I went to Granite City and was interviewed over there. Well, they liked what they heard. I got a job there, and I worked there for 5 years, and they opened the Baldwin Power Plant up. And I knew Doc Slawgater, my neighbor. He helped me get in down there, and had a good career, 26 years down there as a machinist.
How did your service experiences affect your life?
100%, I'd say that if I hadn't have got into the machining aspect and tried to be a good one, you know, you could have went helter-skelter, I guess you'd say. But no, it worked out well for me, being a machinist, and me and my family.
What key knowledge, skills, abilities, and experiences that you learned from military service would you say are the most valuable?
Well, you learn to deal with people when you're in the military. You're side by side. You know, when you're, everything you do, somebody's standing next to you. And when you're a civilian, you can do as you can do as you see fit by yourself. But when you're in the military, you do what the group does, and you have to follow instructions and so forth.
Do you feel like you had very little free time where you were just by yourself?
You have some, not a lot. And when you do have free time, you don't get to call all the shots.
How has your military service impacted your feelings about war and the military in general?
Well, I was in the military in peacetime. I never got involved in any wartime. There was one little skirmish that some place was invaded that I thought I was gonna get involved in. Turned out it didn't. But I don't think it really made that much difference the way I thought on war. Don't like war. It's not good for anyone.
How did you feel about the idea that you were maybe going to get involved in some type of combat?
I wasn't afraid to go into combat, but I didn't look forward to it either. I don't know if anyone does. If they think, hey, this is what I want, I can't believe that there are people like that, but maybe there are.
What message would you like to leave for future generations who will view this video?
Well, I went in the service when I was a young man. I got 4 years in the military. I got a lot of good experience. I learned a lot of good lessons. I grew up. I got hit on the head a few times, so you learn to listen, and you leave people. I leave them with the thoughts of listen and do what you're told. Okay.
Is there anything you feel like we haven't discussed or should be added to this interview?
Know that the buddies of mine, people that I had a number of them. When I was first in Texas, I didn't have that many. You don't see, because you're trying to adapt to basic training. I got out of there, Chinook Field. I did have some friends at Chinook Field that we went and seen airplanes, and we flew. Like you said, did I ever fly? We got in some old B-25s, and the pilot took us down over the Ozark Mountains in Missouri, and had a good time there. And so when I went to Michigan, then I got to fly a little there. Well, yeah, you learn a lot, and you learn to get along with people real well. And if you don't, it's your fault. Yeah.
Would you like to talk a little bit about your two friends that you saw again later after you got out of the military?
Sure. With Roy Daniels, we were sitting in the backyard, 2-3 years ago, and I talked to him on the phone but he'd never mentioned coming here. Well, I was sitting in the backyard here in Sparta, and I seen this big trade, you know, what do you call them?
Like SUV or mobile home?
Mobile home.
Uh-huh.
I seen a great big mobile home, and it turned a corner on Dewey Street, and I thought, wonder who that would be. And he tooted real loud and pulled in my yard, and it was my friend from Montana, and got to visit with him, and I told him he could leave the camper sit right there and sleep in my yard, but he wanted to take it out to the shooting complex and got him a place to park it. He stayed 3 days. We had a good visit. We went over into Missouri and drank a few beers and hashed old times, and we really did. We got to know each other again.
And what did he do in the military?
He was a flight line mechanic, and yeah, we all kind of was in the same barracks, so when the planes would fly and scramble, we call it scrambling, scramble up to the dew line in Canada and fly, and then when they come back in, you always had to be there to fix what was broke, you know. And the mechanics would refuel and check everything they had to check, and I had to fix anything that they broke, and so that's the way it turned out, and it worked out pretty good.
You worked together as a team.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you would like to mention?
No, I seem to cover it all. I know people get tired of hearing all this stuff.
No, I don't think we get tired of hearing it. I think it's very interesting to us. Well, thank you, Mr. Phelps, for agreeing to be a part of the Veterans History Project. And this concludes our interview. We thank you for your service.
You're welcome.